Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Gladney University. We're so excited that you guys can join us in a different creative way. I know that we can't be together in person from all the craziness that's happening, but we're so excited that you guys are able to join us virtually. Just a couple of different housekeeping things. If you guys are needing CEUs, the link to that form will be put in the chat, which is on your little dashboard on the right. It should be under chat. And that will be released towards the end of the training if you need those CEUs. If you have questions, we will actually do the entire training. And then if you have questions or want to have comments or anything like that, Bill has said he will stay a few extra minutes after 11 o'clock for those of you that do have, some comments or questions. All right, so everybody is muted right now. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Bill Porter. He works at Gladney. He's a licensed professional counselor supervisor, fancy, in the state of Texas. He has 20 years of experience in providing counseling, support, and advocacy to at-risk children, youth, and families. He joined Gladney in 2013. And he spends most of his time leading his team in providing best practices to adoptees, birth families, and adoptive families. He's been trained through Trust-based Relational Intervention, or TBRI, and he provided clinical supervision and consultation and evidence-based programming. He received a Bachelors of Arts in Religion from Southern Nazarene University and his Master's of Education and Counseling from North Texas. So excited to have Bill Porter. He's going to talk us through how to be mindful in a situation that we are trying to figure out how to manage our neurochemistry with all the crisis and pandemic and all that kind of stuff that's happening. So we'll let you get started.
Thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today from my wonderful bedroom here at my house. Never done a training from here, so it's like Jenny said, these are interesting times, and I think everyone's sharing that. You can hear it in the news. You can hear it in the stress of people who are just talking to you, whether it's your family. It's challenging. This isn't the first time that most of us have gone through something challenging. The reality is a lot of us have gone through situations in our life that are really, really tough. One of the situations that I think of is the death of my sister. My sister was my best friend, and we grew up together as missionary kids, and she was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 16. And went in and they had to amputate her arm, but she went through treatment and it went well. But then a few years later it came back, and then by the time it came back she had about 6 months, and then she died. And it was a really, really horrible experience for me. I was 20 years old at the time. I was in college, and it literally just broke my heart in so many different ways. And through counseling and help, I've healed from that. But I will tell you that in situations like this, it hits us not the same chord, but a similar chord of, okay, this is a little scary. This is hard. There's new stressors, and I think that any of us who've gone through grief or loss or something that's really challenging, it's probably hitting us that way. It's kind of like, oh man, whether it's if you've ever lost a loved one, or you've ever have gone through a really stressful time, maybe an accident and you had to recover from that, the shock of that. If you've ever lost a job unexpectedly, or maybe for some of us, this is the first time where maybe we have a lot of young people, who are listening, who really who their experience hasn't been that they have a framework for something like this. And so that can also lead to so many different thoughts about what does the future look like? What about my job? What about, oh man, I mean, how many conversations are we having about how do we handle our kids all of a sudden, right? We have kids that we have to take care of. And so I think although we're in this situation, my hope is that what I talk about today will transcend just this situation and transcends into any situation of pain or difficulty or stress, that this is more universal than just this moment. Because obviously, you know, my challenges today are one thing, but there may be people who are listening who have loved ones who have been diagnosed right now, and so they're in a much different situation. So hopefully what we talk about today transcends all of it, whether it's today or this should, if done well by me, should be relevant 10 years from now when we're going through something like this. But I'll tell you that in situations like this, our neurochemistry hardly ever is prepared. It doesn't matter if, you know, you have tons of loss in your life and you work through that. It doesn't matter if, you know, you've earned your wrinkles, right? The truth is that it just always hits us in unprepared, like we're just not used to it. And the reason is because our neurochemistry, the way that and when I talk about neurochemistry, I'm talking about not only our brain, which obviously everyone thinks of brain, but you have sort of what I consider the brain, which is the frontal cortex, and then you have your limbic system, which is sort of the emotions, and then you have your body, and then you also have your gut, and the neurons run through all of that system. It's not just my brain. So when we go through things like this, our neurochemistry loves repetition. It loves what's normal. It loves the way that it works is when you do things. Neurotransmitters create sort of neural highways, if you will, of repetition, and we get used to our schedule. We get used to our routine. And anytime that's really thrown off, our neurochemistry responds sort of in a survival, okay, what's happening? And so all of us right now have a stress level that is affecting our neurochemistry. It's not just affecting our brain, it's affecting obviously our emotions, it's affecting our body. So, what I want you to do is, I want you to just take a moment and think about that. Think about your body for the first thing. Like, how does your body, and maybe this isn't a stressful situation for you, and that's okay. But under stress, how does your body change? Um, you know, so let me just give you a couple seconds just to think about what is happening in your body, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of like some things that potentially could be happening. Go ahead. I'm really going to give you a couple seconds. Think about your body. Okay, so let's think about this. Do you feel more tired, or do you feel more manic? You know, do you feel more like, oh my gosh, my body is just tired, I'm worn out, or more like, oh my gosh, I have all this energy? Do you feel like maybe your digestion? You know, I know that when kids get really stressed out, they have diarrhea. I mean, it's just because the changes of the neurochemicals and the neurotransmitters in the body under stress affect the gut. That's why when you get stressed out and anxious, it really affects your gut. You know, how's your digestion changed? Do you feel? I mean, literally, you're, and this is going to sound crazy, but your BO, like you could have more body odor, that it smells more intense. And that's your body responding to stress. That's your neurobiology responding to stress. And let's move now on from like our body, because I know that's probably something that we're like, okay, I kind of sense that. From that, it kind of goes into the senses a little bit. Are your senses more aware? Are you more alert? Are smells and tastes and like all that, is any of that been altered? Because it absolutely can be altered by stress. Um, and then let's think about our emotions. This is probably a little easier. You know, the body may be like, okay, you're right, I never thought about that. But the emotions, man, what's happening with our emotions? I can tell when I talk to my team that the emotions of my team, which I've worked with some of these people for 7 years now at Gladney, I can tell that it's different. that it feels different, especially for those who are parents. And so the emotions would go, I mean, it's a spectrum, right? It could be that we have extensive emotions. You know, anytime we're going through stress, our emotions can go up. So we're more angry, we're more upset, we're more just, I guess, dramatic, we're more extra right now. Or maybe it's the opposite. I've talked to a few people and maybe they feel more numb, almost like my system's shutting down, like my emotions aren't, I can't find them as much. I can't able to express them. And so then almost I get lost in my emotions. And then let's move up the neurobiological system and move up into the frontal cortex, which is our thoughts. You know, what's happening with your thoughts? Are you, are your thoughts racing? Are you finding that it's hard to think? One of my favorite movies is Joe versus the Volcano, and he has a brain cloud. So like, are you experiencing the brain cloud, which is I can't even like take in all this information and process it? I mean, that's the challenge is, you know, to say that, oh, this is affecting our neurobiology in this way. There's no one size fits all because every one of us, every one of our neurobiology, every one of our systems react differently. If you took it to the extreme, that's where the fight, flight, or freeze response occurs, right? That's the sort of the end of our neurobiology is, do you accelerate so much that when you really get into that moment, you almost are fighting, which is that manic, heavy emotion? Or are you the flighter, which is the one who just can't deal with this? And I'm literally compartmentalizing everything and I can't, I'm stepping away. Or the flighter who's literally running away and says, I'm out of here. I'm going to find myself doing other stuff. I'm going to find ways to run away from this situation. Maybe seek pleasurable activities only, or seek things to take my mind off it all the time. And the first thing I want to say is that none of this is bad. Our neurobiology responding to stress is a system that was designed to help us. It is a good system that we have changes in us. And that sounds weird because we wish we could just do things as normal. But our body knows through information that comes in through our senses and is sent to our amygdala, which is part of the limbic system. And the amygdala says, hey, this isn't right. This seems weird. My file cabinet of experience is saying that this is scary or this is a hard time. And it doesn't matter if it's today or, you know, like I said, like the death of my sister. That's where my body says, this is horrible. This is hard. And the amygdala then starts saying, okay, well, let's figure out how we're going to survive. And so then new neurotransmitters, whether they're inhibitory to try to soften everything or they're excitatory to try to prepare us for the fight, new neurotransmitters are running through our body. Like you're having neurochemicals in your body in times of stress that aren't normally there. Unless you're constantly running on high alert and all the time is just full of just adrenaline and everything, most of us have a more stabilized environment where we get into some sort of routine, some sort of level of normalcy, and then we enter into a situation like this, and then all of a sudden our neurochemicals change, our hormones change. I would assume that the levels of cortisol in all of our bodies has increased. Cortisol is the stress hormone. That's what allows us to get prepared for winter, if you will, right? That it's when we're under high stress, this is what happened like when you're moving a home or you're changing jobs or maybe you're in a different country through work, your cortisol level goes up. And that sort of is a stress hormone which helps prepare us for whatever the body is preparing for, the changes, the differences, all the stuff. When that happens, digestion, we go from rest and digest, right? We're resting and digesting, and that's our normal world. We get into a less restful situation, and we move into a more reactive. Okay, now I'm going to survive, and that's all good. If it wasn't for that, there'd be a lot of times where our responses to situations wouldn't be appropriate. If there wasn't some level of anxiety right now, then technically we'd all go out without any care. You know, we wouldn't think twice about how should I manage this? And so the stress level is good. It's not a bad thing. It's an adaptive thing that our bodies have learned how to do in times of stress. When we are going through a really hard time, it's probably beneficial that we sleep more. Or when there's a lot of things on our mind, it's probably not uncommon that you're going to wake up like I have been waking up almost every morning at 5 a.m. with just 1,000 thoughts in my brain. What about this? What about that? The fears of job, the fears about my kids, the fears about any of it, all that stuff is waking me up. And the truth is if it wasn't serious, then there shouldn't be a response. But because this is serious, there should be a response. We should respond. And so I just want to say that it's normal, that it's good that our bodies are doing this. But the problem is that this adaptive reactive system that is inside of us, if not, what's the word? If not managed or if not assessed, can take over. And that's a little bit of kind of why we're talking about this. How do we manage situations when our neurochemistry is in a situation they're not prepared for? Because if left to its own devices, a lot of times our neurochemistry can become problematic in a situation like this. And I want to spend just a moment to clarify what we're focusing on today. And what I'm going to focus on is relationships. Your neurochemistry may be problematic for, how clean your house is, or, how, your food, maybe you're not eating as organically as you want to, those things. But I'm not worried about that. What I'm talking about is how our neurochemistry in a heightened, fearful, stressful situation can, if not cared for, if not assessed well, can damage the relationships. And so what a lot of that is just that we either are overreactive in a lot of situations or maybe underreactive in the situations. So I want you to take a moment and dig a little deep here and think about, is there anything in the last, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks where my reactions may have been damaging to a person in my life? And it could be maybe that you have become more aggressive with your kids. Maybe you become more aggressive with your spouse. It could be that maybe you've pulled back and you're almost not present in some of your relationships. I'll tell you, it could easily be that maybe you're harder on your team, your staff. I mean, you're working from home, you feel more anxiety, and so you're basically you're handing that stress onto your team. So let's take a few moments, and I want you to think about in the safety. Hopefully, you're in the safety of your home, and the kids aren't around you. If they are, then good luck. But just think about your relationships with the people you care about and the people you're interacting with. And just take a moment and think about that. Has there been any damage to relationships? In an effort to not make this too weird, I'll go ahead and step back in. I don't know if you had enough time to process it, but my guess is that the answer to that is probably yes for probably all of us. It doesn't, when our systems go into a survival mode, most of the time we're reacting out of what we feel like we need, and it's a much more physiological response than a frontal cortex response. Our survival, our limbic system is more quick to respond or not to respond. And in those situations, things like relationships, which are complex, are more have more nuances to them. Things like that aren't really held in context most of the time. So there's a good likelihood that either you've seen someone or you've been a part of potentially overreacting to situations or underreacting. I want to share something that's kind of cool, is that what we just did is we actually took a second, even though it was only about 20 seconds, we took a second to be mindful. And what mindfulness is, and there's a lot of different definitions to mindfulness. And I think for me, this is my 22nd year in the field, for me, mindfulness is my brain's amazing ability to pause and pull itself out inside, like my mind's eye, my mindfulness, and actually look back into itself. It's a fascinating part of our frontal cortex that our frontal cortex has the ability to, in a sense, create a space inside our mind where we can then analyze our mind. It's so bizarre. It just doesn't make any sense. But I can literally almost pull, and it just sounds like science fiction, right? I can literally pull myself out, like vision myself out, and then look back at myself and say, how am I doing? So I can do that. Like for me, if I was sharing, I would say, okay, what's happening in my body right now? Well, I can tell you, that I do feel more tired. I do seem to have more aches and pains. It does seem like my digestion's not functioning correctly. When I analyze using mindfulness and I look at my emotions, I could say that I've literally, for the first week, was almost numb, and I literally would just sit there and just kind of, and be almost detached. But then now I'm probably a little more aggressive, so that's happening, and then my thoughts, I find myself when my wife is watching the news, I find myself leaving because the news, in a sense, creates, and it could be any new, it just creates a little bit of anxiety in my head, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about stuff too much. And so that's me being mindful about myself. And the truth is that there is no more important skill in this time right now than mindfulness. And the reason is because if I'm not being mindful and I'm just reacting to all these situations and I'm just allowing my neurochemistry under stress to do what it does, the truth of the matter is when this is all over, I probably will have some longer term consequences with the relationships of the people I'm interacting with. You see, if I don't pay attention to what I'm doing and how my responses are, and I'm just responding, what's going to happen is that my neurochemistry, if left to its own devices, will damage the relationships of the people I'm with. It just happens. It happens because I'm scared. It happens because I'm anxious. It happens because I'm out of touch. It happens because I'm numb. I will literally, without meaning to, in my own just response to stress, and it doesn't matter if it's today or, like I said, this is relevant for any situation, my response to stress, because what happens is when we give ourselves the permission to say, I'm surviving, then what happens is we almost allow our reptilian brain, which is the lower part, our brainstem, like the reptilian brain, to take over and say, I don't give a crap about what's going on. We're going to do this. And in doing so, things like communication, cooperation, patience, all those things that are so important in the management of our relationships, we literally give ourselves permission to just throw it out. We're like, this was great when everything was calm, but now everything's falling apart. So this stuff right here, I ain't got time for this. We're throwing this out. And what now we're going to do is I'm going to take control and I'm going to manage this with authoritarian, parenting, or I'm tired of having these conversations with my husband, and he has to get up, and all of a sudden now our neurobiology just takes over, and all of a sudden we have all this aggression and anger and frustration. And it's horrible because there's stories of kids now. There were 2 children who were killed because of child abuse. And I guarantee you it's because the parents now are having to deal with something, a stress level they probably never dealt with before. You know, maybe you want losing jobs, not having, and so the truth is that it's adaptive, but it can be so damaging. And so mindfulness is like the only way that I can say, and what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is me taking a pause, is me stepping away from a situation and assessing myself, assessing my responses. And this is a learned skill. I have to literally step away from a situation. And this can look different for everybody. You know, probably for most of us, our mindfulness may hopefully have occurred maybe when we were driving to work. You know, our mindfulness may have occurred in our offices or in moments where we were alone. Because the truth of the matter is, you can't really be mindful if you're interacting with other people. And so that what this pause looks like is me pulling myself away from the environment that I'm in that's creating all this, and taking a moment of time and analyzing and reviewing and looking at what's going on and how am I doing and how am I feeling and what's happening in my body and what's happening in my emotions. And when I do that, I am able to hone it in, to say I'm so disconnected. I gotta get back in the game here, or to say my emotions are just crazy. I gotta bring it back. So for those of you who are overreactive, mindfulness, you know, obviously is to bring you in. And for those of you who have compartmentalized this or have pulled away, it's to kind of call you back into the game. And that can be done. I mean, I'll be honest with you. For me, mindfulness right now is walks. You know, we take a walk. You know, luckily it's not hot enough yet that it's actually enjoyable. You know, I walk my dog every night. And these are things that probably didn't matter to me as much, but right now they're crucial. They're crucial for me being able to take a moment and assess. So I want you to take a moment and think about it. Is there a time in your day that you are allowing yourself to be mindful? That, you know, I mean, be honest with you. Maybe the only time you got is on the toilet. Like, okay, that's fine. But think about it. When is a time in your moment of chaos? Because I know your kids are home, you're trying to work, like it is literally chaos. Is there a time or space where you take to be mindful? Um, and if not, is there a time you could? So let me give you a second to think about that. Are you being mindful? I love doing this because when I give you guys a second, it's funny. I imagine people like, you know, mixing their cookies and doing other stuff. So hopefully you're at a place where you can participate in this. So, you know, technically, I'll be honest with you, I could end the training here and be like, don't forget to be mindful, right? Like, good job. But it's funny because I knew that I was going to do this training um, for the last week, and I've really been processing this training and thinking about, you know, mindfulness and what it means. And in one of my moments of waking up at 5 in the morning, I realized that wait a minute, this isn't enough. And let me tell you why. It could actually be dangerous for some people to be mindful. Um, if I tell someone to actually pause, to take a moment and just pull back, I could actually uh, create harm for somebody. What if the thoughts that are running through their head are so severe that they literally are if they actually stop to think the weight of this situation or the weight of any situation that they're going through could be so heavy that literally I could be asking them to go into a place that they aren't, that they're not prepared to handle, in a sense. I mean, think of someone who's thinking about harming themselves. Would I tell someone who's at that point to say, you know what, just take a break and just think about it? The problem with that is that in a way, I could almost create a space for all the negative thoughts to rush in and take over. And so mindfulness is a little bit of a dangerous situation. And so for the next half of this little training, I want to talk about the content of what mindfulness is and what, in a sense, we need to consider when we are becoming mindful, because there's a lot of ways that our brain can really throw us off. So a lot of mindfulness can be done through just relaxation, meditation. A lot of it can be done with like body scans. So there's a lot of there's different apps that you can find that are mindfulness. And I think that's important, is that we make sure that we're directive in our mindfulness. I don't want you just to sit and, take a pause and process everything. Because by the time you're done, you're like, you know what, you're right. I need to divorce my husband. I'm going to send my kids to my grandparents and I'm done. I'm driving my car and we're getting out of here. That's not helpful, right? So if I'm like, take a pause and think about this stuff, there's a potential that where you go when you take that pause is like the exact opposite that I was intending. And so I feel like this is really important stuff. And what's funny is I was processing through all these things and I had these ideas and I'm writing all this stuff down. And this week, this weekend, this last weekend, there was an interview with Brene Brown on the news, and she literally started talking about some stuff about like mindfulness, but also like what is in the process of mindfulness and how it works. And it literally confirmed all the stuff I was thinking about. And I'm like, oh, this is too good not to share. So the first thing I want to share a little bit about of a couple things that I think would be really important in this situation is when you enter into mindfulness, and I want to share two things, just two ideas. The first thing I want to share, well, let me tell you why. Let me go back for a second as to why it's dangerous. When I pause myself in this moment to, in a sense, take a moment, what happens is, if I'm not careful, my past comes out. In my moments of pause, when I wait and listen, the truth is that all the stuff from it actually goes all the way back to your childhood. It's bizarre. In the ideal world, when a child comes into a home, comes into the parents, in the ideal world, a child has parents that do two things. The first one is that they're completely safe, but they're also encouraging. It's the whole love versus structure dynamic. And so for a child to be in a safe place, the neurology all works really well when a child is in a safe place. I mean, that's kind of what we're all looking for right now, safety. But the neurology all works really well when we're in a safe place. So if you think about the ideal world for a child is that they are safe. They have what's called secure base. You can do tons of research about it. And what happens is when a child feels safe and loved and cared for, they go out and they do great things and they explore. And then when they get scared, they come back. It's what all research talks about is safe and secure. And so in a perfect world, when we take our pause, we all have in us experiences of safety and security. That when we take our pause, we're able to go and say, wow, I'm really scared, I'm really hurt or whatever. And the reason that we feel safe is because we've had that safety and security. The problem is, for most of us, we may not have had that in our childhood. We may not have experienced safety and security in our childhood. And that's why when we take a pause, it may not be helpful, because our experiences of our childhood may be that we didn't have safety and security. Maybe we had parents who were aggressive or abusive. Maybe we had parents who didn't do a good job of letting us know that we're loved and that we're cared for and that we have what it takes to do this. And then maybe we never had parents, or maybe we had parents who weren't even there. We had parents who weren't available because they were so busy, or they had their own demons that they were fighting. And so if we didn't have safety and security in our past, then when we take our pause, the reality is that our past, our brain, our neurochemistry finds a way to pull all that crap back up. It almost floats to the top. So mindfulness without direction is dangerous, because our voices in our head could be it could be damaging, it could be critical, it could be that our self-worth isn't good. I mean, that's the biggest thing, is that I don't want to tell someone to be mindful and then all of a sudden they're just rushed with all these horrible thoughts and horrible emotions and self-criticism and self-doubt, because I know through research that if you give yourself permission to listen, that it's all connected to your childhood. It's connected to, were you safe in those early years? And if you weren't, then that message and that story is going to play through the rest of your life. It's literally was it secure or was it insecure? Because if it's insecure, then the resources in your neurochemistry, when you go look for it, you're not going to find it. If I'm going to say, okay, I'm in a moment where I'm completely stressed, I'm like, okay, let me see, how am I going to survive this? And I take a moment to go back. And what if I don't find anything? What if I don't find anything good in my history, in my past, that's going to say, you know what, Bill, you got this? What if I don't find anything that says, Bill, even though you may be scared of losing your job, it's going to be okay. Bill, it's going to be okay if something, that in this horrible situation of, what happens to my future, I can go back to my self and say, you know what, it's going to be okay. Well, that message only comes if I had someone in my life give me that message. I don't just create that. And if I don't have that, then when I go to my well, if you will, my mindfulness, all I'm going to be filled with is, oh my gosh, you're right. It's worse than I thought. When I dig deeper, when I'm thinking about, like, I failed with my kids, I didn't do a good job today. Let me take a moment back and just reflect on it. Oh, you know what? You're right. I suck even more than I even realized. And the reason we feel that way is because we have messages from our past that have told us that, and they stick. And so it accesses us, it hits us. And so the problem is that's not helpful in a situation like that. So it's not helpful for me in my situation to try to assess my history, or try to take a moment and pause. So you know what, Bill, forget it. I'm not going to be mindful. That's stupid. Why would I be mindful if in my moment of pause, I go and take a break and try to assess, and all it does is make me more angry, or all it does is make me realize, like, I don't have what it takes at all. And the truth of the matter is, like, forget it. That's stupid. That's not that's not worth it. See, that's what happens. And so Brene, when she talked about, like, what has to be in mindfulness, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really powerful, and I need to share this with you. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about the two parts of what it means when you're going through a moment where you're stressed out, where our neurochemistry doesn't seem to be able to manage this, where remember we did the assessment, where you may be overreacting, you may be underreacting. So let's talk about what happens in the space of mindfulness. And the first thing I want to talk about is vulnerability. Boy, I'll tell you, there's so much research right now that talks about what happens to people who aren't acknowledging the emotions that they're going through. And so vulnerability is not self-deprecation. It's not like, if I'm going to go and be vulnerable, then am I going to, in a sense, like, criticize myself? No, what vulnerability is truthfulness. Vulnerability says, in my moments of silence, I have to be 100% honest with myself about how I'm doing and how I'm feeling. It's about connecting with myself. What is happening in me? What is going on inside me? And so what that looks like is I need to take time to pause my neurochemistry and step away and be vulnerable and honest with myself. The process of vulnerability is about acknowledging your thoughts and saying, okay, here are thoughts that I'm experiencing. Here's some things I'm thinking about. Fears, like here are some fears that I'm going through. Emotions, like I find it so interesting. I can literally see the emotions of people, even though they're trying to not demonstrate them and they're having conversations. You can literally feel the emotions coming out of their pores. It's literally like it's being seeped out of them. And I think to myself, like, are they taking time? Are they taking a moment to just acknowledge that and not to intellectualize it? Like I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling anxiety, but to actually feel anxiety, to actually feel what that feels like, the tension, the pressure. Well, I'll tell you, if I learned nothing else early on in the death of my sister, is that you're going to have to go through the pain and not around it. In that situation, when you lose a loved one that's that close as it was for me, she was probably the closest person I had. She was older than me. She was kind of like my best friend. Boy, there was no way to go around it. It was too big. I just couldn't get around it. Whether it was the depression or the tiredness, I literally went from being an extrovert to being an introvert. It was the worst grief I've ever been through. But I realized I can't go around it. Like I have to go through it. And our neurochemistry in some ways wants to resist that, especially when it comes to hard feelings or pain. We in a sense are all averse to pain. And so we almost we just don't want to go there. But in this vulnerability, the thing that we're sort of required to do is to go there, is to sort of say, this is where I'm feeling. And not that it's bad or good, it's just being honest of saying, I'm scared. I'm scared about my job. I'm scared about our finances. Like this is scary. What about my parents? What are the emotions you're feeling? And I think most of us will find that if we really ask that question, you realize that there's probably some stuff that you've been pushing off. There's probably some things that you've been, and I will say this, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a maybe a little if you will, a little bit of a mixed message here. Some of you may feel negative emotions about yourself. You may feel shame. You may feel brokenness. This process, and that's okay. And I'm going to follow up with what we need to do about it here as my second point. This brokenness is right now, I would say, probably unavoidable. And this is not like a Bill idea. This has been part of our neurobiology. This is part of our neurobiology, is that we come online when we go back and we're honest. And what this vulnerability is, and what this vulnerability represents, is us running back as children to the loving arms of our parents and bringing our mess to them and saying, can you help me fix this? It's us coming back and saying, I don't know what's going on. I'm scared. And I am bringing back this mess that I have in front of me, and I'm giving it to you. Can you help me? I don't know what to do. My marriage, my kids, my pain, my job, my boss, all this stuff. And what we're doing in vulnerability is we're literally just bringing it back and going, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. It's that sense of like, it's the Alcoholics Anonymous of like, I just accept, I just I just surrender. I allow it to be real. And I'll be honest with you, this is not normal. Most people don't do this. Most people don't want to do this. Most people don't want to feel the pain because we're averse to it. But the truth of the matter is, if you don't do it, the consequences are just going to keep playing out. Because what I love is that in this moment of absolute just rawness, and it's in the comfort of yourself, right? Like, it's not like you're doing this in front of everybody. You're doing this in your own mindfulness and just being honest. And maybe you need to write it out. Maybe it's time to journal. Maybe it's time to, have those. In that moment, the second part is that it has to be met with self-love, with self-acceptance, with self-forgiveness. Like, the message that you have after you're vulnerable is love. Like, once you're vulnerable and you in this mindfulness and you allow yourself to be in the pain, then what you have to do is create the discipline and the skill of saying, okay, now I have to meet this with love. Love that says it's okay. Like, it's okay. Like, it's okay that you failed, maybe. It's okay that you've struggled with your kids. It's okay that you've hurt your spouse or you've said things that are okay. Like, it's okay. And I love you and I care for you. And this is where, in a sense, the loving parent that now the child has brought all this pain and this hurt, the loving parent then says, I got you. I got you. I got this. Like, come to me. Yeah, that didn't work out real well. But you know what? I love you. It's okay. You know what? We will work through this. You're forgiven. And so this mindfulness is that I have to create these messages in my own mind about myself. This is what Carl Rogers talks about, that unconditional positive regard, that I have unconditional positive regard. And Carl Rogers is talking about it. He's a therapist who brought out person-centered. Carl Rogers is talking about, I, as a counselor, I'm supposed to do this for my clients. But as a person, honestly, I'm kind of supposed to do it for myself. Now, that doesn't mean that I absolve myself of any damage I've done. No, I acknowledge it. I have to just acknowledge it first, that I hurt somebody. And then I have to be met with love, because this is how our neurobiology works. This is what our neurobiology needs. If I meet myself with self-criticism, if I meet myself with self-doubt, with all the thoughts from my past, what actually happens is I go deeper into neurobiological shame. And neurobiological shame says, I'm not worthy, I don't have what it takes, I'm not good. And then what happens is I begin to, number one, react out of that shame, and all I'm doing is going to hurt more people and sort of share that. Or number two, I just isolate myself into my own world. And the problem is we all have such terrible scripts that have been written, because of the stuff that our parents didn't even know that they were supposed to do, that we haven't, in a sense, figured out how to rewrite those messages in our brain, which say that, number one, you're loved, you're cared for, you matter, it's going to be okay, you can be forgiven, you have what it takes, like, you are safe. You're safe. You say, no, Bill, I'm not safe. Have you seen what's happening around me? Are you watching the news? Are you going around? And I'm going to tell you, there is a message in this world that says you're safe, that you matter, and that you're loved. And it's there, and it's there for the taking, and it's been shared, and it may not be shared through your parents, but it's shared in the millions of things that are occurring in the world around you. And if you sit and think, most of you will be able to come up with a person, because remember, this is something that's given to you. It's not something you come up with. You can think, in your history, there was a person that came into my life that actually showed me this unconditional positive regard, someone who showed me love. There was somebody. Who is it? I don't know. It could be a teacher. Maybe there was a teacher. Maybe it wasn't your parents. Maybe it was your parents. And if that is, that's great. I'm happy for you. For the rest of us, maybe it wasn't our parents. Maybe they weren't that good of it. But there was someone who says, you matter, you're important, I care for you, and you're safe. And those messages are so important for us to hear right now. And even though we may not, and you can say, no, that's not me, Bill. I need to keep these bad messages in my brain. That helps me to perform better. Or no, I don't believe that. Well, the truth of the matter is, you don't have to believe it for it to be real. But the truth is that that message is there. And it's an archetype. It's written into the history. It's written into our neurology, that our neurology needs to feel safe. It is written in the story of our parents. It's written what it means to be a parent. Is to say, like, how hard is it for me to say to my child, dude, like, you just jacked that up, but I love you. You can't take away my love for you. Like, you're my child. And so if I, in my parenting, am able to do that for a child, then that means that's real, and that's what I have to experience. That I have to know that even when I screw it up, and even when my neurology is acting crazy and it's all haywire, and even when all this stuff, that I, number one, have to be vulnerable, but number two, I have to just sit in love. Sit in a love that says, you are not alone, you are cared for, that you are going to be okay, that you're safe. And most of us don't want to do this. Most of us don't know how to do this. But the truth of the matter is, this is the journey of life, is rewriting those scripts to be able to say, you know what, you're right. I matter. I'm safe. I have what it takes. I can do this. And in that experience, something powerful happens. You know, we think if we're vulnerable that we're just going to fall apart. We think that if we're vulnerable that, you know, we're just going to be a big mess. But the truth of the matter is, if we're vulnerable and then we follow it up with the right messages, the messages of love, the messages of safety to ourselves, we say, yeah, Bill, that was really stupid. Why'd you say that? Oh, you know what, though? It's okay. You know what? It's okay. It's okay. Forgive me. I forget. You know, like, I'm forgiving myself for being stupid. I'm loving myself and say, you know what, you matter. And even if you say to, you know, even if it's like I'm losing my marriage or I'm losing, you know, like, it's gonna be okay. Like, Bill, you matter. There is a story of love here that transcends you, that's deeper. It's what Wayne Dyer calls the source. You know, it's what you know uh, uh, Alcoholics Anonymous calls, you know, your higher power. It's nature. It's all these things. It's the things that connects us all, is going to be love. It's this deeper message that we just have to start tuning our ears to hear. And we need to start tuning our ears to hear, not going to give it to somebody else first, but we got to experience it ourselves first. That we have to experience this self-forgiveness, this self-love. And then what happens is, when we go through this transition, in the same way that a child runs back to his parents and just lays it all out, and a parent in the ideal world lovingly forgives and restores and helps and provides safety, then this magical thing happens. All of a sudden, our neurology comes online. It just comes online. And we're like, okay, well, now what do we do? And then, like a child, after they feel safe, ventures out into the world with curiosity and learning and everything, always knowing that it can come back to the safe place. When it ventures out, all of a sudden now, the possibilities of our neurology are endless, because we're online now, finally, for the first time. We're not walking into this with all of our self-doubt and our self-criticism and all these rules and all the pressure and all this stuff. We're literally like, oh, I've forgiven myself and I'm working through this, and I've experienced a love that I may not have heard from my parents, but I've heard through life, and I've actually started looking for. Now I'm ready to kind of go out and do again and face the world again and have courage and re-engage with my spouse and say, boy, I really blew that and I love you and I apologize. And now I'm healing, you know, relationships, and I'm managing stuff, and I'm back to engaging with my kids differently. It's the process by which all of this neurology and all of our neurochemistry, in a sense, it's like gives it back, it brings it back to life. And then now we're in a new reality that is so much more powerful and so much more, if you will, online with being able to not only love myself, but guess what? Now I get to love those around me. I get to experience this self-forgiveness, and I'm not shaming my kids when they make mistakes, and I'm not yelling at them all the time. And don't get me wrong, you know, there's parts where they have to repair and they do all that stuff, but I'm not, in a sense, destroying their future by the messages I'm putting with them. That I'm saying, you know what? It's okay. I got you. I forgive you. Let me be there for you. As I got 5 more minutes, I want to share 2 stories. I apologize. In my sophomore year of college, after my sister died, you know, I was very blessed to have different people in my life who were supportive of me. They they came beside me, and they you know, were supportive. There was a counselor who was really helpful. But I want to share one story to me that I remember very, very clearly, and one that resonates with me in times like this. I went to a small Christian college, and there was a chapel, which is like a church service, and in the chapel was another student was teaching. It was just one of our students. She was doing sharing, preaching, and the point of her, and this was after my sister died, probably a few months after, and I was just in the deepest grief I'd ever gone through. And the point of her sermon was, let's be real, let's be real, like, and it was simple. Like, it was just, you know, there's so many times where we have all this, the fakeness, and we have all this other stuff that's out there, and truth of the matter is, let's just be real with what's going on with us. And I remember sitting there in chapel and thinking to myself, I can't do this, I can't be real, like, I can't go to this pain, it's too much, I can't go there. And I remember her saying, like, let's be real, let's be real. And I thought, oh, I guess I'll do this. I guess I'll try it. And so I allowed myself to feel the pain of losing my sister. In that moment, I literally began to wail. I started wailing. I don't know if you've ever seen anyone wail, but it's really different than crying. It's this body ache. It's just this intense pain that runs all through your whole body. I'd never done anything like that. And the truth is, I've never done it since. And I began to wail. And I'm literally in front of like 2,000 of my other classmates. You know, they're all walking out of chapel. And here is Bill, just wailing, just crying to the deepest part of my soul. And as I'm crying, something really powerful happens. My buddies who are sitting beside me, first of all, they just sat with me and they waited as everyone leaves. I mean, everyone just is walking out, and just, they know, you know, people knew that I lost my sister. But what my buddies did, my friends, they literally wrapped their arms under my arms, and they wrapped their legs around my legs. And I had one guy on each side of me, and I had a guy behind me, and he held me. And I just cried, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried for probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And they just held me the way that I needed to be held, the way that I needed to work through this vulnerability. And it was something that I will never forget. I will never forget the feeling of being held. It was one of the most powerful message reversals in my mind of, you're alone, you have nobody. And in this pain, you're just gonna have to manage it and push it away. And yet in the moment where I just lay it out there, all of a sudden and one of my buddies is like a farm boy from Nebraska. The other guy is like he's you know, and he's now in the FBI. My friend on this side over here, you know, he's a doctor, like he's a radiologist, and he's not, you know, these aren't counselors, these weren't like people who were, you know, trained in psychology. You know, the guy behind me is like, he was a big hunter, and like now he sells hunting land in in Oklahoma. Like, these guys are just regular people, but they tapped into something that day that said that you are loved, Bill, and you are safe, and you are cared for, and we're gonna do this together, and you're gonna be okay. And it rewrote something in my mind that says, you know what, I got this, I can do this. I want to finish with my second story, because as I've been thinking about this, and I've been thinking about all the stuff that we've been talking about and all this, I've been paying attention to my boys and saying, are they doing okay? Are they hanging in there? And for the most part, I kind of was thinking, you know what? And this is scary. I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I said, for the most part, they're doing pretty well. They're doing pretty well. They're hanging in there. And so I guess it was last Saturday, we went and visited my in-laws just to make sure we're doing okay. And of course, while we're having this time together where we're checking in on our family, you know, we talk about coronavirus and all this stuff. So as we're leaving the house, we're driving home, and it's about a 30-minute drive. And we're on I-35, and we're talking about different stuff. And all of a sudden, my boys start asking questions like, you know, do you think that we'll be okay? Do you think we're gonna, you know, die? Like, what's gonna happen? And it's because of the conversations that we had. Like, they were serious. And all of a sudden, my 10-year-old, and I'm not driving, Kristen's driving because she gets car sick when I drive. So I'm in the passenger seat. And all of a sudden, my 10-year-old in the back seat begins to cry. And he begins to cry, and he doesn't know why, and he hasn't told us why, but he begins to cry. And he begins to cry really deep. And all of a sudden, I'm back there in my chapel. And I'm like, this is that thing. This is that thing that you went through, Bill. Remember that? And I can see it. It's the deepest need. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I know this. I know this thing, this fear, this thing. And so I'm like, oh, I know exactly what to do now because of what my friends did. I take off my seatbelt. I'm a big guy. I weigh 260. We have a Kia Sorento. And I'm like, oh, he is not going to go through this alone. So I'm literally crawling over the stick shift, over the back of the seat. You know, I have one son, my 13-year-old, he's a big guy, and I have my little 10-year-old, and I'm literally like squeezing myself in, and I'm like, you're not going to go through this alone. You are loved. You are safe. We got this. And I literally grab him, and I'm holding him as tight as I can as he's crying. And I'm rubbing his back, and I'm telling him that he's loved. And I can't tell him some BS that everything's going to be perfect and everything's going to be safe and nothing bad's going to happen because I have no idea. But I don't care because I don't need my externals to tell me that I'm safe. I don't need, it's not about my bank account. It's not about my family. It's not about the way my spouse, are you kidding me? My spouse, like she can't answer all those questions for me. I got to seek it deeper. I can't put that on her. I can't even put it on my kids. Like I got to go to the source. I got to go deeper into the story of love. And in that moment, I can't BS my son out of this fear, but I can be there with him and tell him that he's loved and tell him that he's cared for and he's safe, even though it may not feel the same way. It doesn't match everything. And all of a sudden now I've just given to my son the things that I needed when I was in sophomore in college. And I have just replicated that because that was what was given. And the truth of the matter is, if I can do it for my son, then guess what I have to do? I got to do it for me. And in my moments of fear and anger and frustration, and in the moments where I feel like I've screwed up the most, and the moments where I feel like I'm not worthy, and I have so many stories, and I'm not lying, I have so many stories of failures that I've done with my kids, that I have to extend the olive branch of love and forgiveness and hope to myself. To say, it's going to be okay, Bill. You are safe. You are secure. There is a story that is written in the fabric of our lives that is bigger than you. And the amazing thing is, and this is where I challenge each of you, if you start to look for it, you'll begin to find it. It's everywhere. It's in the people you interact with who say you're cared for. It's in the way that you look for it. The pastors, counselors, the different things. So in this moment where we are literally broken, be truthful and be vulnerable. But if you're going to do that, do yourself a favor and follow it up with love. I don't want you to follow it up with self-criticism about how you could have done that better. Like you may get there later, like you can analyze it later, but your first response to yourself in times of this is love. Is love, forgiveness, safety. Do yourself a favor. It's the only way for your neurochemistry to realign itself. If you don't do this, when you go back out there, you're going to be more of a jerk to your family. You're going to be more of a jerk to your kids. So there does no good if you don't follow it up with the right ingredient. And the ingredient is vulnerability, and the ingredient then it follows up. It has to be preceded by love. It's what we need. It goes all the way back to our childhood, that when we're scared, that when we're hurting, there is open arms that says, I got you, I love you, and I can be there for you. We can do this. And so if I know that it can be extended to people outside of me, then I have to make sure that I'm doing it to myself. I love you guys. I'm sorry I went over a few minutes. If you need If you haven't experienced any of this and you need maybe help, this is where counselors and other people come in. And never, ever be afraid to seek professional help if you're going through something like this. If you can't get there and you're saying, Bill, I hear what you're saying, but I'll never be able to get there. That's okay. This is not something you can do alone, and we're not supposed to do it alone. We need the help of others. So thank you so much. So Jenny?
Yeah, thank you guys so much, Bill. That I think put a lot of words to some of the emotions that everybody has been feeling. I feel like the entire world is kind of at its boiling point, and we just don't know what to do because we've never experienced it before. If you guys haven't listened to Brene Brown's new podcast, Unlocked, I think is what it's called, it's amazing, and she talks a lot about this is the first time for everybody in the world kind of going through this, and there's going to be a lot of emotions, but with that, kind of like what you were saying, there has to be grace that comes with that. And we just have to figure it out together and be able to kind of tap into our community and be able to find that support there. It just may look different than what it normally does. Thank you guys so much. If you need to drop off to go to another responsibility, feel free to do that. Bill will stay on for the next, how many more minutes you think?
That's fine. Whatever.
Okay, however long, if you have questions or comments, we'll see if we can do that in the chat or if we can unmute you guys. Also, if you are wanting a CU, just make sure that you fill out the questionnaire. It should be, you guys should have gotten a link for that, and that will be emailed to you guys within the next 5 to 7 days or so. Sometimes it just depends on how long that takes for our staff to get to you. Okay, so I'm gonna see if I can unmute people or if we can just do questions. Does anybody have any questions?
You can also raise your hand and then Jenny can call on you and we could unmute you.
Ah. Let's see.
Hey, Bill, it's Emily Byford. Can you hear me?
Of course, yes.
Hey, I wondered if you can talk a little bit about any advice you might have about managing like day-to-day things with kids under stress, like managing school and keeping routines, even though nothing feels routine, nothing feels the same. But can you talk any to that about like how much, I mean, like you were kind of talking about like structure versus grace. Like what do you think? I mean, every family's different, every kid's different, but like, do you have advice on like what's working in your home and what's not? Or like, just kind of, I feel like we go completely back and forth on like, it's all relationship or it's all structure right now. And I'd love advice on finding a place in the middle. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the first thing I'll tell you is, the grace that you're going to extend. First of all, you need to extend grace to yourself, firstly, because if you're not extending grace to yourself, because no one's going to get this right. No parent is prepared for this. No parent. I mean, my wife, we've been doing kind of a homeschool, private school, and I told my wife, I'm like, Kristen, you should do a training on how to manage this. And she goes, yeah, my training will be yell at your kids a lot because that's what you're going to end up doing. And it's like, it's just impossible. It's impossible to manage, how are you supposed to work from home while also doing homeschool? And so part of it is just being graceful with yourself. I'm going to say something that I probably wouldn't have said, I haven't thought about this, but there's also a part where you may have to be in some ways mediocre in some things where you're not going to be able to get it all done. And so you're going to have to decide what am I supposed to be mediocre about and what do I not? And so if you're a perfectionist or if you kind of have had a history where you like to get everything done, you can really overwhelm yourself if you're trying to get everything perfect. And so a lot of it is just making sure that you're, prioritizing what is important. Obviously, the most important thing is going to be the relationship. And let me explain why. You're trying to teach your kids school, right? And learn math or whatever it is. But kids are really good at feeling the feelings that parents are going through and experiencing things differently. So if you're stressed out and you're not managing that well, all you're doing is you're giving your kids more stress. Well, guess what your kids are not going to be good at when they're stressed out? It's math, because their frontal cortex is where all that learning comes from. And so if you're not providing a semi-safe place, then they're not going to experience safety. And if they're not experiencing safety, then their neurotransmitters go up. And if their neurotransmitters go up and they go into sort of a reactive response, well, guess what? They're not going to be able to learn. So safety and predictability are probably like the first thing I would look for. What does that predictability look like? I think a lot of it is just managing what we call, and we're going to have we're going to have more trainings on this. There's something called the sensory diet, which I think is really, really helpful. The sensory diet says that I'm going to feed my kids every 2 hours. I'm going to do like a little physical activity, and then they can kind of sit down and do work. So part of it is trying to break it up more into like maybe 2 little sections of like, okay, let me feed them, and then if they're good, if they're regulated, then let me go ahead and try to teach them. If not, maybe they need a little bit of physical activity, so I'll involve physical activity, and then after physical activity, then I can follow up with a little bit of teaching and learning and doing all that stuff. And that's how you're going to manage that throughout the day. Another thing you highly need is probably if you can, to try to separate them and give them a little more space. And then the other thing is, and this is just from my experiences, what are things that they could potentially do that you can get them started and they can do? And as long as they can see you, a lot of times they will do it, and you don't have to be right beside them. So I think that's part of it, is managing that. But I would say you want to manage their emotions first, because that's where, if you can manage their emotions, then it can help. But I mean, Emily, I'm not gonna lie to you. Man, I don't know how we're not, this isn't gonna be easy. And so there's some things that are just, you're just gonna try to get through it as best you can. And the goal is to just not damage the relationships in the process. I mean, that's what's hard. So I don't know if that was helpful or not, or if that answered it, or if you have a follow-up question to that.
No, that was really helpful. Thank you, Bill.
Anyone else have questions? You guys can unmute yourself, or you can ask it in the chat box.
Hi there, Bill. This is Jane Stillwell. I am a CASA volunteer, but my question honestly isn't about my CASA kids. I have a grown son, he's 28, who's had anxiety pretty much his whole life. Real manageable, very successful, but he's a teacher now, and of course they've been home. Got 2 young kids, and that is going fine. They're doing well, but his body, obviously his stomach and all of those things that are involved, he's really not able to eat much at all. And pretty much is able to play Animal Crossing all day when he's not doing anything with his students or helping the kids with school, which I totally recognize, and he recognizes as escaping and not having to think about anything. But they were in between count. It's just, this is probably not even a question you can answer. Honestly, it's going to be one of those, you can't make somebody do something. But finding a counselor in this time right now is so difficult, because you know how important that connection is, and all of that stuff. Like, we talked and we checked in, and he acknowledges all that. He knows that he has the anxiety. He knows he's doing okay. He's getting stuff done at the house, but he can't eat. And I just.
Can I ask you what happens when he eats? Does he throw up?
So he's always had the fear of throwing up growing up. that anxiety. And then turns out when he was 15, he had major abdominal surgery because we found out that part of it was he had all twisted up intestines. So that's all that was taken care of. But that's 100%. He gets full, or he goes right to the bathroom. He doesn't throw up because that's his big fear, but he won't put much in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is a really, it's interesting that it's so much related to his body, but I think anytime you have an underlying issue and then you go through severe stress, your body is absolutely going to respond that way. I think one of the things that, and this is probably comes a little bit from just my experience of like Dr. Purvis and some of the people who have been talking about it. Part of it is about new sensory input. Some of the things that help our kids who are even teenagers, are things like weighted blankets, like just feeling the weight of something on top of you that makes you feel safer. Is probably something that would be, trying to figure out ways to engage his senses differently in times where you don't have a counselor. You can always go online, you can always see blogs, you can always see videos of like how to manage your anxiety. But to me, part of it is a lot has to do with the way that I manage my body. Things like the way you're doing your breathing, the way that you're doing, if there are times where you can really manage your breathing, things that you can do to, and maybe this is where exercise has to come in, and really kind of get out there and go through those walks or different stuff like that. To me, a lot of it when it comes to the body is through sensory movement. It's hard to change the body through the frontal cortex. You actually change the body through the body. And so it may seem like it's almost anti-counseling because it's not so much counseling, but obviously if he can get in with a doctor, but things like probiotics, I mean, those things could be really helpful, as long as he's able to take vitamins and probiotics and, hopefully he can manage the storm. But yeah, I think anything he can do with his body, exercise, weighted blankets, things that are, I mean, even stuff as silly as taking a bath, might or might be able to, in a sense, sort of calm the body down to be able to be more at rest so that he's able to eat. But I mean, I'll be honest with you, like my digestion has been messed up for about a week and a half now. And part of it has to do with sleep and stress. So it's because, so much of our we have so many neurotransmitters and neurons in our gut. It's actually known as our second brain. And so it is absolutely going to affect, all my boys have diarrhea. Like it's all going to affect our digestion as well. And so sadly that this isn't just a brain stress, it's a body stress. So yeah, I honestly a doctor would probably be able to answer this better than me, but I think some of those things, if it's about the body, you got to go back to the body. So
yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question for Bill or just a comment or just want to vent about something?
Cool.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for allowing me to do this and for personally for being a part of the conversations that led up to the training. So I appreciate you.
You're welcome. And we will have another Gladney University April 16th, and it's going to be about how are we going to figure out how to report abuse, childhood abuse in a social distancing world. So that'll be an interesting topic that we have from some of our presenters with Alliance. So check out our Facebook for more information about that in the coming days. Thank you guys so much. Have a good one.